Welcome to MSL Talk with Tom Caravela, a podcast specifically designed for MSLs and all things field medical. Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast. My guest today is Mitch Rosario. He is a senior MSL at Genentech, and we talk about three key factors that have altered the MSL role since 2020. So it's an awesome conversation. You guys, Mitch is amazing. I know you guys are going to enjoy this. Don't forget to follow me on LinkedIn. Check us out on YouTube. All our videos go up there. And join us for MSL Talk Live, which is the first Tuesday of every month at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And that's on the LinkedIn Live platform. Hey, Mitch, welcome back to the podcast. How you doing, buddy?
Hi, Tom. How you doing? I'm doing well. Great to be back.
Oh, I love it. I love it. And guys, for those of you who may not be familiar with Mitch, he's been on this show probably 3 or 4 times. I think this might be the 4th time. Every time he comes on, it's amazing. Go back and listen to prior episodes if you haven't heard Mitch, but he came to me with this idea. I just say yes. And Mitch comes up with an idea. I just automatically say yes. So Mitch, why don't you introduce yourself before I continue to rant and rave about how great you are, so you could tell everybody who you are and where you're from and all that good stuff.
Sounds good. Tom, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Mitch Rosario. I am a senior MSL at Genentech Roche. I cover hematology. Before that, I covered ophthalmology at a smaller company as well as at Genentech. Little thing about me, I'm a dad of 2 toddlers, a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. So staying very busy, and all of the thoughts that I have here and all of my views are my own, and not of my company.
Awesome.
Back to you, Tom.
Well, welcome back. Today is going to be a milestone, because by the time this episode airs, we will be hitting our 3-year anniversary. Maybe to the day. It might actually be exactly our 3-year anniversary. So, no better person than Mitch, because he's been someone that I've known for a long time, and he's helped me with this podcast since the beginning. So I'm grateful to have you back on. And the topic what we're going to talk about today is 3 factors that have altered the MSL role since 2020, meaning since COVID hit. So Mitch came up with this idea, and I think it's going to be really insightful to talk about how far we've come, what some of the changes were, and then we're also going to take a look at the future. So Mitch, you came up with this idea. So where do you want to start with this?
So what's really interesting is that the first time I was a guest on your podcast, that was on February 16th, 2021. So exactly almost 2 years ago.
Wow.
And you had asked me at that time, Mitch, what do you think are the new trends that we'll see since the pandemic? How do you think things are going to change? And I thought this would be a very good way of looking back 2 years back and seeing how things have changed, and talk over it and discuss that with you. Also, this is going to be kind of an opportunity, because the first couple of podcasts I've talked about breaking into the role.
Yep.
This is going to be more about what is it maintaining and sustaining in the role.
Yep.
So the 3 things that came to my mind were, in no particular order. The first one that I phrased it as was virtual engagement is the pandemic's silver lining. So we'll talk about the pros and cons of virtual engagement. The second one was, how does the MSL role transitioning from a scientific role to a more strategic role? And then the last one is the importance of preserving your relevance and authenticity while embracing technology and automation. Kind of more futuristic viewpoint. So I'll let you, would you
Well,
want me to start with the first one?
let's unpack that a second. So you have three things. Now, did these things were you just like, I have to talk about these three things where it's so profound? Or was it like, hey, I'm going to reflect back and the top three things that stand out in my mind are these? How did this hit you? Where was the inspiration for this?
Well, you got to prepare when you come to Tom's podcast. That's first of all. But also it was more about reflecting back on where I was 2 years ago
Yep.
and what I've learned over the past 2 years. There's been
Yep.
a lot of changes that have happened.
Yeah.
And you talk about it, about positive mindset and having that positive mindset within through change to encounter change and move through change, right? Having that positive outlook for whatever happens, we will succeed.
Right.
That's one that's really important. Having goals. So, and then the second thing was, you know, you a lot of your podcast guests that have come up, you've asked them questions about what are the new trends. So I kind of have listened to a lot of them, and so I was trying to find out ways that I can either tie in some of the comments that they've made,
Mm-hmm.
but then also think of is there something that's newer that I can
Mm-hmm.
bring to the table?
Yeah. Yeah, and look, I think the first one seems pretty obvious. I think it's something, thinking about the shift to virtual is something pretty obvious. I think everybody would agree with, but use the word silver lining. So tell me why you use the word silver lining, and let's get into number one, because I think that's really probably the most important thing that came out of COVID was that shift towards virtual engagement, but you specifically said silver lining. So I want to hear your thoughts on that.
So I found it really interesting during the pandemic, the move towards virtual engagement. So pre-pandemic, what I was seeing a lot of was the need to meet people in person, or the fact that if you don't meet with them, you're not going to be able to maintain that relationship. And what the pandemic has taught us, or since 2020, what we've learned is that you don't necessarily have to meet in person to maintain a relationship. And that opens up doors because that has changed behaviors for physicians and healthcare providers, where they're now more open to come to Zoom. They're more comfortable coming on Zoom or a Google Hangout or a WebEx and meeting with you. So I think that has been a big behavior change. And because it's been so long that we were in the pandemic, I think the longer you stay in a behavior change, that could lead to long-term changes as well. The other thing also, I think we talk about how important, how great virtual engagement is. We're doing virtual engagement right now, right, Tom? Like we're on a Zoom meeting. And there are several pros to it. I think virtual ad boards have been are flourishing now. Clearly, we don't need to, a company does not need to pay for everyone to come in for an ad board. They can do it virtually at the comfort of their living room. But there are some cons there as well. There are some challenges with virtual engagement as well as digital engagement. I think a lot of companies are moving towards digital engagement, where as a HCP, you can find information that you're looking for on a website. And I want to talk about those a little bit. I think one of the biggest challenge that's happening with virtual engagement is the information overload. Right? I think there's a large volume of data. The medicines that we have are more complex, so the information about them are more complex, and the speed at which that it's hitting you is a lot, right? Versus an in-person meeting where you can actually gauge the other person's body behavior and body language to see if they're actually understanding what you're telling them, or are they overloaded, right? That's one. The other thing also is that leads to maybe disinformation about your medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And that could also lead to anxiety, that whole idea of analysis paralysis, right? When you have too much information with you, it's hard for you to make decisions. So I think that those are some of the challenges that are going to come with virtual engagement and digital engagement. And I think MSLs play a huge role here, Tom, where I think that we are the curators of knowledge for the
Mm-hmm.
products that we support, right? I tell my HCPs, I am your librarian, I'm your resource librarian. I'm here to make sure that you get the right information at the right time.
I'm writing a note because that's a quotable. MSLs are the curators of knowledge. But what I really like about what you're saying is that you didn't just say that there's a silver lining and virtual engagement's the greatest thing ever. You also said that there's pros and cons to it, which I think that's important. I think it's important to realize that there is something that was very positive that came out of COVID, and that was the necessity to have another outlet for communicating. We all adopted the virtual outlet, but it doesn't come without a price and without drawbacks. So I think, I mean, do you want to talk about that a little bit more? Or do you think that it's like the MSL's responsibility to really control and navigate through those nuances?
I think any relationship depends on trust and respect, right? And I think it's virtual engagements are fantastic when you already have trust built in.
Mm.
But like our relationship, for example, like Tom and I, we actually met physically. We met at a conference, right? And that's where we built our rapport. And then since then, we've been able to maintain it virtually.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the same thing with interactions with your HCPs as well. I think there's a level of trust that you can build with in person,
Mm-hmm.
which is difficult to start off virtually. It's easy to maintain a relationship virtually, but it's very difficult to start a new one.
And I'm a big advocate of live engagement and interaction. I think you're making a mistake if you rely solely on virtual. And I think that the impact that you're going to have on your relationship is going to change. I don't want to use the word dramatically, but it's going to change and it's going to improve through live engagement, live interactions. Probably not across the board. I mean, there might be situations where it gets worse. I don't know. I don't think so. I think that if you're a good MSL and you get FaceTime and you make the most of that FaceTime and you show your value and you and have really strong engagement and good communication skills, you're going to grow your relationship with that KOL.
Right. It's the frequency is going to decrease, but the opportunities for face-to-face will still be there. I think the frequency is going to decrease. And I think there's always the need. There's a philosopher that I really like, and his quote was, "You don't go to the community and try to change it. You go to the community and let it change you." So it's so important for us as MSLs to be the boots on the ground and go to the community and let their insights change us. And while virtual is really important, I think being in person is also equally important to build those new relationships.
Agreed. Totally agree. So let's talk about number two. Let's move on to number two. And I believe you had mentioned the word authenticity. But talk about number two and how that's important.
Sure. So number two, which was number three, and that I said, which was preserving your relevance and authenticity while embracing technology.
Oh, that was number three. I screwed that
was
up.
Number three, but we'll skip it. It's okay. We'll skip to number three. If you look at the last 2 months, the biggest change that has happened is AI, right? Chat GPT.
Yeah.
Sarah Snyder, who is a frequent guest of yours, talks about it on her LinkedIn. It's this really fantastic platform where you can go in and ask any questions. You can ask it to like rephrase something. You can ask it to give you points about something. You can ask it to write a story like The Godfather for medical affairs, or write in the voice of Borat,
Yeah.
talking about medical affairs, whatever. You can do all of this fun stuff, right? Um, but what's really interesting about it is that it allows you to have, when you use it, let's say if you asked the ChatGPT platform, what are the biggest challenges in medical affairs? It comes back with some really good insights.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is here to stay. I think this use of AI, artificial intelligence, automation, I think those are going to be really interesting to see in medical affairs, how it's incorporated in terms of gathering knowledge. But the challenge, what happens, I feel the challenge that's going to be is how do you maintain your relevance in that situation? If information is already available, what is your role as the curator of knowledge for your ACPs to make sure that you're providing them the correct information,
Right.
dispelling any disinformation, and then also making sure that that information that you're providing them is personalized more than the AI?
Yep.
Right. So like if an HCP can just go into ChatGPT and look up your product, the molecule that you're supporting, what is your relevance there? How can you make your interaction with them different? And I think that's going to be a challenge, but I think that's also an opportunity for us as an MSL.
For sure. And I think that, when you look at ChatGPT, it's like Google on steroids, and it's like comparing Google and artificial intelligence robots, and it just literally gives you not the answers to the test for whatever it is that you're looking to learn. I think to your point though, number one, I think that there's going to be a lot of reluctance, and a lot of people, especially busy KOLs, are probably not going to go on there and look for themselves. Some may not be aware of it and know about it just yet. I think the future is probably going to be there. We're not there yet, but you hit the nail on the head. Like, it's up to the MSL to be the curators of knowledge, have that relationship so that the KOL isn't going to think of or want to go to something else or someone else because you have the relationship. I'm just going to ask Mitch. I'm going to talk to Mitch about this. That's the goal, right?
And it's not that you don't have to compete against ChatGPT or AI, right? I am okay with them going to another platform and getting information, but then you still want to be the curator of knowledge. You still want to be someone that they can bring those information in and, be able to dispel any disinformation. So that relationship building is still very important. So I'll give you an example, right?
Yeah.
Before I came on your podcast, I actually went on ChatGPT and I was like, what are some of the newest trends in medical affairs? And I looked through all of them and I was like, how can I make the 3 points that I want to bring to Tom's podcast different, so that the audience that are listening in, they can find some information that is different from what they can find on ChatGPT readily, right? So here, I'm not competing against ChatGPT. All I'm doing is providing newer information, different information than what I can find myself on that platform. So I don't think we need to fight against it, but I think we can use it strategically. Yep. And then the other part of it is being original and authentic to yourself, right? Now the challenge that's going to come is oftentimes what I fear the biggest issues that are going to come with ChatGPT and automation is that you don't have a writer's block anymore, right? You just go in and you're like, just show me the trends or write a speech for me and I'll write it for you. So you don't have that writer's block anymore, but it's very easy, Tom, to find if an AI has written something or if it's a human that has written something.
Sure.
So there's a 22-year-old Princeton student that actually wrote a code that you can actually take any passage, put it into his website, and see if it was written by AI or human.
Mm-hmm.
And that is really important because, we're in the midst of Black History Month. Imagine a CEO is found out that the email that he sent to his employees was written by AI about Black History Month, and it wasn't them.
It wasn't authentic.
It wasn't authentic. And so I was reading this article from Forbes yesterday that came out a couple of days ago. It's from Sean Harper from University of Southern California. And he's the chair of urban leadership. And one of the things that stuck to me was his last sentence. He said that CEOs have to be mindful of what the first letter in AI stands for. For employees, they do not want nor deserve artificiality in DEI communications they receive.
Wow.
So I think those are going to be major shifts, right? We'll have these new technologies that are really exciting. It's going to be really important how we use it and how we stand out differently from what they provide.
Absolutely. No, this is such good stuff. And I knew this was going to be a good conversation, but I'm glad that we're touching on are these topics that are very relevant and they're current, but I think a lot of people aren't really sure what to make of it. Like, what do you make of ChatGPT? What do you make of AI, and how is it going to affect the medical affairs landscape? How's it going to affect my position? How's it going to affect your position? I think everybody's like thinking this, and we kind of almost want to put our head in the sand and say, okay, well, you know what? I don't need another thing that I have to figure out and I need to deal with. Some people like Sarah, who's on my team, Sarah Snyder, like she embraces and loves all this stuff, and she takes the time to like dissect it, and she's really good at that piece of it. But I think a lot of people are just kind of like, I don't want to deal with this right now.
Yeah.
But you put this into a really good perspective in that there should be a word of caution that if you do go on ChatGPT, just realize that whatever you're going to use that information for, like, let's just say for argument's sake, you want to write a book. There's two ways to do it. You either write it yourself or you get a robot to write it. But when the robot writes it, it's not your work.
Yep.
It's your idea, but it's not your work. And there are ways that can be found out. And I'm sure if there are publishers out there that are going to check it and be able to say whether or not, by the shadow of a doubt, it's your work versus something else. So I think we just need to really be careful. You use the word authenticity. I love that word. I think it's important. This is great. So let's go back to, I think we have to go back to number 2. We skipped number 2, didn't we?
We certainly did, but they all are similar ideas. Like they all are interconnected. I mentioned that we're the curator of scientific knowledge, right? And then I mentioned how it's important to maintain that relevance and authentic self. And I think that number 2 is more about how do we transition as an MSL from scientific partners to a more strategic role.
Okay, got you.
And what the strategy, like the strategic part of it is not, it's still in staying in medical, right? It's more about anticipating the need of the HCP. It is more about prioritizing real world data as it affects the patients that are using your product. It is listening in and being curious for any shortages or scarcity. It is imagining clinical trials that are relevant for the patients and for diverse patients. So maintaining diversity, equity, and inclusion. So those are kind of, that's a different mind shift, right? A mindset shift where you're not only just acting as a sage on a stage, right?
Yeah.
You're not just the oracle that has the information. Clearly, we know now that there are technologies that can do much better in curating information than you. But what's more important here is asking, how do I partner better and collaborate better with my internal colleagues to find the right opportunities for my HCPs, to anticipate what questions that they might have, so that I can either reactively answer them or in certain situations proactively answer them. But then also keeping that eye on what is the value of your medicine to society? What does inclusion look like in your trials? How does real world data inform your product strategy?
Well, and it's interesting, and and more themes, more sayings, more quotes are coming out of this episode. So we started with MSLs are the curators of knowledge, and then we advanced it to MSLs are the oracles of information. So we're definitely coming up with some new terms. What I love about what you just said is, and this is no disrespect to anyone. I know that everyone listening to this podcast is probably either a really good MSL or about to be a really good MSL, or maybe you're an MSL leader and you get it and you're listening to this because you want to get better. And there's two ways to look at this. So you have two MSLs and they both get trained on the same information. But one of them is tactical and goes out and just kind of disseminates the information and just does the work. The other strategic. So you use the word strategic. And the MSL that's strategic takes that extra step, understands the KOL, knows what their needs are, knows about their practice, is a problem solver, and is going to take that information about that KOL and truly be strategic so that the resources, skills, toolbox that they have, that they're equipped with, they're going to take and make it useful and beneficial and be valuable to that KOL. Is that a good way to put it?
That is a fantastic way of putting it. Like, that's succinct. The other thing also is that there's one of the sayings that one of my colleagues has that I really like, Larry Lyons. He says, a fast no is better than a drawn out maybe. Right? So being strategic doesn't mean that you have to get a yes answer for someone all the time. Being strategic is also saying, we're going to have multiple shots on goals, and some of them are going to fail. And I'm letting you know that some of them are going to fail. Some of them are not going to work, but we're going to have multiple shots on goals and see which ones are more strategically placed, right? And this could be, for example, HCP comes to you with an investigative initiated trial idea. Not all of the IISs and IITs are going to be approved, right? So you have to kind of ensure that you're letting them know that it's a no fast and early. Yep. They appreciate it. Yep. One of the things that my HCPs, one of my HCPs said was that, Mitch, one of the things I like about you is that you're direct. Like, you tell me where things are going to go, and you just don't take up too much of my time. And I think that's exactly what I think a good MSL does, is that they come in with the right information at the right time without taking up too much airspace.
Well, there's another expression, and I forget who said it. I almost want to say it was Nick Saban, maybe. It was definitely a college football coach, but the expression is fail fast and fail forward.
Yep.
So if you Google it, you'll figure that out. But it's saying the same thing. It's getting to know faster so that you can get to the yeses that you need to quicker as well. Mitch, this is awesome, man. This is some really good info.
One of the things I want to point out is that I was listening to some of the podcasts from before, and you've had some fantastic guests over the years. I mean, within the last 2 years, I mean, some of my favorites. The last one that I listened to by Mina was really great, being humble.
Yeah.
Being one of the things that I really liked about him saying was, you come into the room and you say, I'm going to stick it through,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
might not have the answer, but I'm going to stick it through. It's so important that people are not only the change makers, but also the change adapters,
Yeah.
right? You've had Sheree Hyder, you've had Arthur Chan, like some really Bernadette. Her podcast was great as well. But yeah,
Bernadette Mamone, actually,
Bernadette
her
Mo.
podcast was the single highest first day download I think that we've had in history. Believe it
I'm
or
not
not.
surprised. She
Yeah.
is so well known and
So
so
good.
well spoken. Such a good podcast. Sarah Snyder's Mom Life podcast was so great. I learned a lot from it as well. So yeah, great. So just to recap the last 2 years, we talked about 3 ideas that I brought
Yeah.
in, but overall, Tom, this has been a fantastic 3 years. Congratulations on that.
Oh, listen, man, I'm grateful for, so you named a bunch of people, which is just a kind of a fraction of the greater, everybody you mentioned is a monster. So grateful. But over the course of, this is our 144th episode, and over the course of 3 years, I think the greatest thing to come of this podcast is the insights that have come out of, and the experience that have been shared with the guests.
Mm-hmm.
Tremendous content and knowledge. And I am truly grateful that I have a part of it, to be able to be involved in these discussions. And I'm grateful for the community that it's built, for the listeners, over 250,000 listeners in 80 countries. It's amazing. I'm just so humbled. I'm grateful. I'm blessed. And I can't wait to see what happens for the next 3 years, because I'm going to
It
keep doing it.
it is such a blessing, but it's also intimidating being on your podcast
No,
because
it's not,
you,
Mitch. Come
you
on.
always have to ask yourself, what can I say that hasn't been said by all of these tremendous speakers, right? So it's also sometimes intimidating. But one question I wanted to ask you, Tom, was that since 2020, how has your role changed and your team's role?
Yeah. Well, things have changed on our side. Hiring's different now. So that's affected the way we do business. And obviously, pre-COVID, there were only live interviews. Nobody was setting up virtual interviews pre-COVID. But when COVID hit and there was no choice, everybody scrambled to figure out, well, how do we continue to interview and hire people without meeting them live? So the onset of Teams, Zoom, and Google Meet and all these other things really changed the interviewing process. And I think probably forever, because to tell you the truth, you remember back in the day when there used to be conference calls? Remember conference calls where you would dial in to a number and you would be a part of a conversation and everybody was like kind of talking over each other? We'll never do that again.
Mm-mm.
We're never going to do that again. We're going to use Teams. We're going to use Zoom. And I think that the phone screen or initial phone interview is being replaced by Zoom and Teams, by the virtual interview. Some companies will probably just continue to do the full interview process virtually because it saves a lot of money. It's a lot faster. But I do believe that a lot of companies are going to go back to the live interview format so that they can meet people. You get a much better feel when you meet people live. But I think one of the biggest changes for us is this notion of virtual interviewing and how we have to prepare our candidates and make sure that they can be successful in that type of scenario. Because I think a lot of people don't take it seriously enough.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of coaching that has to go with that.
On that note, we know that with the pandemic, that's led to a lot of burnout for clinicians.
Yeah.
And you've had a couple of odd speakers that have come in and talked about clinicians switching into as an MSL, right?
Yeah.
Mina is an MD. I think there was another person that I'm blanking on that actually had a talk about why clinicians make good MSLs. are you seeing a shift in your pool of candidates? Are you seeing more clinicians that are trying to break into the MSL role?
We're definitely seeing a lot more clinicians now than ever before. I'm actually doing a podcast soon. And I think it was Dawn O'Reilly.
It was done.
I think it was Dawn. Actually, Dawn's coming back on. And she just reached out to me last week with a good idea. We're going to do, it's not a part two, but it's going to be similar. So she's going to be coming back on soon. But we're seeing, advanced practice nurses and nurse practitioners and physician assistants, folks that come from that APP side of the equation,
Right.
that are excellent candidates. So not only is there, I think, a shift in the talent pool of people interested, clinicians interested in medical affairs and in industry, but I think that industry is now more accepting of these folks than ever before, because there was a time that you remember, there was a time when hiring MSLs really came down to PharmD, MD, PhD. And that's definitely shifted. It's definitely changed. It's opened up. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity for more people now than ever before.
That's definitely interesting. I think that's another trend that I'm seeing since the pandemic is people realigning their work-life values and balance and trying to see what works for them.
Yeah.
And I think an MSL job is a fantastic opportunity in those regards.
MSL job is the greatest job in the world, right, Mitch?
I think so. I think it's you use the word blessing, right? It's such a blessing to do what you do. I used to be a bench scientist, right? I was working on things that may or may not turn into a product in 20 years, right?
Yeah.
But now I'm at the bleeding edge of science. I'm actually talking about things that are near to approval. And you hear stories about how it impacts patients from the physicians. And it's such a blessing to wake up every morning and knowing what you're doing. Plus, I know the things that I'm doing, these are not opportunities that my parents had, right? That's another thing also is the opportunities that I have now is going to set up my loved ones and my children for the future, hopefully for success, right? To be comfortable. Sure. I think those are two things that I always reflect on. And, whenever I'm having a rough day, I'm like, you know what? Geez, my grandparents weren't even in this country. It's just, a lot of the opportunities that I have are so special. And maybe I don't think I don't have enough gratitude. Maybe I don't show enough gratitude towards that.
Well, and I know you don't take it for granted either, though. I know that you're so focused on doing a good job that sometimes you don't realize, how, it's important to take a step back and just I try to be grateful and practice gratitude every single day. It's just part of what I try to do, but you get busy and you get focused and you're running around being great that sometimes you don't realize, how great it is. Let me ask you this, Mitch. Last question. What's next? We talked about the last 3 years and we talked about what factors have changed the MSL world, where we are now, but what do you think is next?
I think what's going to happen with the MSL role in the next maybe 3 years, I think it's going to be the first one, which is more outward looking, is going to be how do we adapt to different technology changes that are going to happen.
Yeah,
I think it's getting increasingly harder to get access, and so a lot of people are moving towards digital engagement. You've had Bruno Lorville come in and talk about metaverse. I'm really intrigued to see in the next 3 years what happens there. In the platform, what is the best way? So the code to crack here is what is the best authentic way to provide information to HCPs and that they like. So that's one. And then the other one is more internal. I think, now we're coming out of the pandemic. People are starting to travel more. I think employee well-being, mental health, team dynamics are going to be really important in the next 3 years, because we've gone through a phase of just having virtual teams. Now you're meeting in person. How often can you meet in person? How do you build that rapport, as well as maintaining, as well as focusing on employee retention and well-being is going to be really important.
For sure. For sure. Well, Mitch, we are out of time, but my brother, you just do not disappoint. You're awesome. So grateful for you and what you've been able to contribute to this podcast over the years. And I'm grateful for our friendship. I'm so glad that we met and that I get to do this with you.
Well, thank you so much for having this platform. This is great. I think, you've had some fantastic guests. So again, it's intimidating being on here, but also I learn a lot from you, and from your guests, every week when I have a long drive. So I appreciate that.
Well, thanks for listening, and thank you all for tuning in. Thanks for listening. Thank you for sharing and for all your support. Love you guys, and I'll see you on the next episode. Take care, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to the show. If you've enjoyed it, please subscribe so that you don't miss episodes in the future, and feel free to leave a rating or a review or a comment. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.